said I love you. Hey, what's up? It's Dan, and I'm finally recording this video, or I'm recording a video in general. I had a lot of requests to do like a breakdown or behind the scenes on how I made this material, which I will go over probably at the end of this video. I'm not sure. I really I do have this video sort of planned out. Like I have a couple notes taken, but like I really want it to be a little organic, I guess. I mean, I'm letting you know right now, this is probably going to be a long video. I'm going to ramble a lot. I'm going to talk about a lot of different topics in 3D. I mean, yeah. And so, I guess to start off, you've probably seen this project, or if you haven't, yeah, I got a lot of good feedback, or people really enjoyed this. And this actually was done in Substance Painter, but like I could have gotten this result in V-Ray and 3ds Max. I mean, there's nothing really special that, you know, I did in Substance. Like, there's a bit of hand painting done on this, but it was kind of more like an introduction to how to use Substance, or like how to like set it up, and like, you know, creating a material in Substance and then importing those maps into V-Ray. But yeah, and like I will go over this. I'll be honest, the breakdown for this is going to be probably pretty boring. It's not that interesting. I mean, I think this is a really cool, you know, a really cool result, and there's a lot of detail here. But it's, like I said, it's not something that's like can only be achieved in Substance. And yeah, and like I kind of wanted to take the start of this video to, I guess, introduce myself if you've never heard of me or never seen my work. And yeah, I guess I'll just pull up some of my work now. Yeah, so this was a Gameboy project I did back in January, February. I'm not sure what month it was. It was like early this year though. And this is an 8K render. Yeah, like it's really cool stuff. I'm really proud of it. I'm sure, I know I've posted this on Behance. I'm sure on Twitter as well. I've posted like a bunch of different crops of this, all the different details that's included in this. Yeah, just some, just lots and lots and lots and lots of details. Actually, for this project, the same workflow that I'm going to show today of my basic, you know, how I approach any material in 3D it's the same approach that I used on this project. I mean, it's the same approach I've been using for years, really. I mean, every so often, like, it obviously changes, and, you know, you learn new stuff or new software. Like, recently, Substance Painter really has blown me away. It's, you know, extremely powerful, and I get why people use it. And so, you know, who knows, moving forward, I might completely switch to Substance for some things. But yeah. What else do I have? This is like a can render from earlier this year. Actually, I don't know if I've even shown this project. This is not even the full res render, I don't think. But yeah, just some cool spritz stuff. Yeah. What else do I have? Another project this was done, I think, almost a year ago now. This is actually rendered in FStorm, if anyone's ever heard of that engine. It's a lot like Octane, but for 3ds Max. And once again, like my general workflow of texturing, which I think a lot of people enjoy my work for it. I mean, I'm not like a crazy modeler or anything, but I do think I have some pretty neat texturing. Yeah, it's all done, even though it's done in FStorm, it's all the same type of workflow. I have one more project to show. This brownie project that I did, which this is all 3D. You know, none of this is scanned. Yeah, some brownie and some ice cream, a nice little dessert. Some cool like microfiber hair scattered and stuff. Yeah, you get it. And yeah, and so that's, I guess, a little introduction to my work if you've never seen it. I also wanted to, which funny enough, a lot of people remember me or know me from these videos, but this is how I actually got my start in the industry. and it was these Redshift tutorials. And actually, I want to say this was the first time I ever made money in 3D or in the industry was these videos that I made for Redshift, which was, man, 5 years ago. It feels like so long. But yeah, if anyone remembers these, it's funny enough. Like whenever like I reach out and talk to you, they're like, "Oh yeah, like I remember seeing your Redshift renders or like these Redshift tutorials." And yeah, and like funny enough, how I got my start in the industry was teaching people, which, I mean, back then I was so clueless. I had no idea what I was doing, and I still feel like I don't really know what I'm doing. I guess I know a little bit more now. But yeah, that's something I actually kind of wanted to talk about before, jumping into all the information, which I know, like I said, I'm rambling. I already said I was going to ramble. Yeah. Also, I'll probably like timestamp everything down below or like have like bookmarks or I don't know what they're called of like the different sections. So like if you don't want to listen to this, you can obviously skip it and you just go to like the important stuff. But yeah, like I kind of want to talk about why I was hesitant to make this video, and it's a feeling of like I don't want to take or I don't want to be in a position where it's like the blind leading the blind, where I am confident in my work and I feel like I have some good stuff, but it's it's not like top tier. Like it's not like the best of the best. There's people that are leagues and leagues ahead of me that can teach you way more. And also like I don't want to like not spread misinformation, but like I don't want to say like, oh, like this is how you do XYZ when it's like a horrible way to do it, or like it's a really slow way to do it, or like stuff like that, which I know it's like dumb to think about, or like it's just like imposter syndrome or whatever. But yeah, it's just something that I wanted to mention, or it's just the reason that like, because I've had other people, or I've had lots of people in the past like ask for project breakdowns or talk about like my process and stuff, and I'm always like, yeah, I'll get to it, or like, yeah, I'll eventually do something, and like I never record it, which like that's why like I'm forcing myself today to sit down and like talk about some stuff in 3D that I've always wanted to talk about. And yeah, and like I said, this is not really going to be a tutorial. This is very much going to be a like an over the shoulder look. I think I kind of described it as. It's imagine if I just went live on Discord and started sharing my screen. That's what I kind of want it to feel like. Oh, also something to mention. I work in print, so mostly still images, and so my approach to shading and my approach to work in general is I need as much detail as possible. I'm working in very high resolutions, so I'm using sometimes 8K minimum resolution textures, and so if you're someone that's like working in animation, or you're someone that's working when render times matter, you might need to be wary of using such large textures, or like using the workflows that I use, because it doesn't render fast. Which for me, render times don't matter. I don't care about render times. If something takes all night to render, that's fine. I'll leave the PC on overnight. Or if it's gonna take an absurd amount of time to render, send it to a render farm. Or if we have like GPUs or CPUs on hand, render it with those. So that's something super important to keep in mind, because like, I mean, this is like an insane amount of detail. Like if you're animating something like this, I mean, and you're animating something that has like motion blur and it's like flying through a scene or whatever, like you definitely don't need this level of detail. But yeah, and like also, I'm sure someone is gonna ask this or wonder this. Do you need to know how to use 3ds Max and V-Ray to get these results? No, and you don't even need 3ds Max or V-Ray to follow along. Or I mean, I don't even know if anyone is gonna want to follow along to this. I feel like it's much more valuable just kind of like listen and really grasp the concepts that I'm going to talk about and like apply them to your own work. I mean, you can obviously follow along, but yeah, and honestly, it's probably better off that if you're not using 3ds Max and V-Ray. I remember back when I used Cinema 4D, or actually when I was first starting learning and I was working in 3ds Max and V-Ray, and I would watch Cinema 4D and like Octane tutorials, for example. I mean, I'm sure everyone's been like guilty of this at some point. When you're watching a tutorial in the software that you use, like you just go into like autopilot mode, and like you're pausing the video like every minute or like every 30 seconds and just copying whatever they're doing. And which, yeah, you might get a cool effect, or you might, get the desired result that you're going for, but like you're not learning anything, right? Like you're just copying someone's inputs. So when you're watching someone work in a different set of software, you can't copy me if you don't use 3ds Max and V-Ray. Like we don't have the same buttons, we don't have the same settings or whatever, relatively the same, but like they're not one to one. And so like you really have to, one, watch what I'm doing and grasp the concept, and then fully understand it and digest it, and then you have to learn, okay, how do I do this in my own software now? Which is a whole nother journey. I mean, maybe you need to go watch a whole nother video or look at the manual and figure it out. And so I think that's everything for the introduction. Probably gonna be jumping into 3ds Max now. So yeah. Okay, so now that we're in 3ds Max, I just have a basic scene here. I think this is like actually the Substance like shader ball that they use. I was just playing around with it recently just because I've been diving into Substance. Just a basic HDRI setup. Yeah, and like also, I'll mention this. I'm working on like an ultra wide monitor, so that's why like the resolution of the recording looks like odd. Like I can't fit everything in the screen without it looking bad. And also like I'm working on like 1/3 of my screen right now, so it's a little difficult, but it's fine. So let's go ahead and hop into the shader graph. And we'll open up the frame buffer. And so pretty much, I mean, this might render a little bit slower than normal just because I'm recording and I have a bunch of stuff open, but it should be fine. All right, so let's just start. Let's just hop right into it. I'm going to create a basic V-Ray material. And like I said, I want to mention this beforehand. I'm not really going to be covering like a lot of the technical stuff because there's people out there that know the technical stuff way better than me and that, explain it way better than me. Like if you're like complete beginner and like you have no idea what a V-Ray material even is, then probably, go figure that out first. Really what I want to be teaching here today or talking about today is it's a lot of theory and it's the concepts behind what you're doing, I guess. Because I mean, this can be applied in any texturing or any software really. So yeah, so we have our V-Ray material. Let's go ahead and apply it to our shader ball. And then let's start. Let me just situate these windows. Okay, cool. So first off, what I do is I create a composite map. Which composite map is essentially, think about like Photoshop layers. That's pretty much all this is. It has an input, and then it has a mask slot, and then it has different blending options, right? So I create a couple composite maps, and I plug this into the diffuse slot, reflection slot, bump slot, and glossiness slot. Now, obviously, if you're working with a glass material and you have refraction, then you're going to have a composite map for the refraction. If you're working with if you have subsurface scattering, then you're going to have a composite map in the SSS slot. If you have a clear coat, you have a composite map in the clear coat. For most like basic plastic and metals, which is probably 90% of the materials that I'm creating, this is the setup that I have, right? And I actually have like a preset like material that I can just click and drag into Max, saves me all these clicks. But yeah, and then also for my setup, I like having the diffuse at the top, then reflection, then glossiness, so it gets a little bit out of order, and then bump last. And then obviously, if you have any other slots, you can place them wherever you want. But like logically, this is how, it's how I kind of view it in my brain, to be honest. Okay, so I'm not gonna have any reference up. We're just gonna go through like the basic, very, 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 very basic technical side of my material creation. So let's just create like a base plastic, right? So we're gonna have a V-Ray color, and let's just make this a red plastic. Now, and like I said, this is like a very incoherent. Is that the right word? It's very I'm all over the place in this video, right? And like when things pop into my mind that I think are important to talk about, I'm gonna talk about them. So for example, when it comes to diffuse map for your materials, right? you should never have 255 red, right? Like, this is not realistic. Nothing in the real world is 255 red, I think. I'm like 99% sure. Like, when you see something this saturated, usually the saturation has been boosted like in post or something. Like, it doesn't look natural, right? And so if you're creating a red plastic and you're trying to be as realistic as possible, you really want to dim back on the hue. And then honestly, for diffuse maps, diffuses are usually darker than you think. And like, let's say you do want a really saturated plastic, right? You would go into post, or for example, you could pull up like the frame buffer, right, and boost the saturation here. And yeah, and like the thing is like, while you're working, if you make a mistake where it's like you made something too saturated, I mean, if you're working with a retoucher on a project, or if you are the retoucher for the project in post, you can always adjust that. But like, it's just a good rule of thumb that, you know, you should never have something this saturated. Yeah, so that's just something to keep in mind and think about. And so then I pretty much just copy this same V-Ray color, and then I plug it into the reflection slot. Now, you can honestly, you can name these different composites to be, sorry, I can't type because my mic's in the way, to be very organized. If I'm working with someone on a project, I might name these different layers just to pretend like I'm organized, but I'm not a very organized person, if I'm being completely honest. Yeah, so we have the reflection slot here, and for the reflection slot, now, once again, see, this is why I've always been hesitant on making videos about this stuff, is I'm not 100% sure, and I don't know if anyone is 100% sure. But when it comes to reflection maps, in theory, like in practice, right, a perfect clean material would have a 255 white reflection map, right? Now, in the real world, almost nothing is just one material, right? Everything has everything has dirt or grime or dust laid over the top. You have oil smudges from like your fingerprints. You know, maybe you ate something greasy for lunch and now you've put it all over your mouse, and now there's another material laid over that mouse. And the point I'm trying to make is like there's imperfections everywhere, right? And so for me, kind of accounting for these imperfections, I just artistically, I lower this reflection map to like 250. You know, in actuality, it's probably more realistic to like adjust the IOR of like the specific parts that you're wanting to lower the reflection for. But like that's a whole other topic and a whole other field of detail that like this is just how I do it pretty much. And that's going to be a theme for this video, is like, I'm not saying this is the most correct way to do it or necessarily right, but like, you've seen my results, I showed you my work, and this is how I achieved them, right? And this is, you know, what I do. And, you know, I'm spending quite a bit of time on this, and it's, you know, this being at 255 or this being at like 240, you're probably going to barely be able to tell a difference. But yeah, like, it's all these little things that, for me, that's what makes who I am as an artist who I am. You know, it's all these little different details that I'm adding and I'm thinking about and I'm conscious about. So yeah. Then I copy that down, and now we're plugging this into the reflection glossiness, right? And the same thing like we talked about before, this is never going to be, you know, 0 pure black, and this is never going to be 255 white. You know, nothing in the real world is going to be this uniformly rough or this uniformly, you know, reflective, right? Very few things. And like, even the most reflective objects probably are not pure reflection, right? So once again, if I want to make this object glossy, I'm still lowering this, you know, a tad. And like, I can definitely tell a difference here, right? I mean, we'll zoom in, we'll see if you can see it on the video, right? This is at 248 and this is at 255, right? Yeah, so it's just a very, 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 very slight blur. Cool. And like, these are just like, what I'm doing now, if I didn't already mention this, is I'm creating the most basic, clean form material that I can. And then we're going to add all the detail, dirt, grime, dust, scratches, whatever, over the top. Yeah, and so for the bump I mean, we can just add like a noise map for the bump, which I use Burcon noise. Which if your 3D app doesn't have Burcon noise, I'm sorry for you. I mean, I don't think there's a material I've ever created that doesn't have Burcon noise included somewhere into it. It's just like a procedural noise system. Has a lot of different, knobs and buttons. It's super nice. And so we'll just create a real basic like bump. Obviously, this is too strong. We'll go to like 0.1. And we'll probably like even lower this even more. Like I'm just wanting to break up the reflections, right? Like I don't want just pure flat reflections, right? And if you look at a lot of reference or just look at things like look at a glass bottle, right? The reflections and the refractions, they aren't perfect. You have this like wobbliness to it. Same with like a lot of plastic materials. Yeah, so let's and like this is like the important stuff to talk about. Like all this like technical stuff is like not that important. It's more like the theory behind it, and it's all this detail that you want to include. Like even like in my base materials, I want to include all this all this detail. Sorry. Okay, so now let's say we want to add scratches to our material, right? So let's load up our scratch map. So this is an important thing to talk about as well, is you want to have a pretty diverse set of textures, in which there are tons of textures out there. Aiden Martin has some great textures. I'm sure like Grayscale Gorilla has great textures, or I'm pretty sure they do have like some scratch maps or dirt maps or something. Yeah, get yourself some good textures. It's pretty important. And so let me just look for a scratch map real quick. Cool. Okay, so we have the scratch map here, and now for me, I'm working in ACES. Now I'm not even going to explain what ACES is and why I use it. Well, I'll tell you why I use it. Most studios that you work with are using like an ACES pipeline, so you kind of have to use it as well. But it's easy to set up. Go watch a video on it if you don't know what it is. But for me, while I'm using ACES, I have to set this to raw, and then set this to none. And this is essentially setting up this texture to be used properly in ACES. And also another setting that I use on all my textures is I reduce the blur down to 0.01, or that's the lowest you can go. Now, I don't know if other render engines have that option. This is essentially, I think the term is like min mapping or MIP mapping or something like that, where essentially the farther the texture is in the scene or away from the camera it blurs it. And this essentially removes that feature. Now, it's going to increase your render times, but you're going to get the most amount of detail you can out of your texture maps. Once again, this is just what I do. If you don't do it, then cool. Yeah, and so for all my texture setups, right, we plug this into a triplanar map, which I'm sure you're familiar with those, just so we can get seamless texturing. Plug that into the wrong slot. And then also another thing that I add to most of my textures is this UVW randomizer, and I enable stochastic tiling, which this is just another form of randomization to the triplanar as well. Which I think it's just like randomly rotating the maps like by 90 degrees, I think, or maybe it's like 180 degrees. I don't know, but it adds randomness. I know that. And so yeah, so let's start adding these scratches to our material. So I include an output map at the end of all my triplanars, just so we can adjust the texture. So let's plug this into the bump, because when you're scratching material, you're editing the height values of that material, right? You're taking away from it. So let's plug these scratches in. Cool, and now we have scratches, right? And right now this is set to normal, so we're basically hiding this original layer, right? And if you ever use Photoshop, I can't speak, sorry. If you've ever used Photoshop, you can set this to multiply, right? And basically the white values won't be affecting this bottom layer, it's just the black values. And so we have our original bump, that the waviness, and now we have the scratches being put over the top. And now you can obviously, if the effect is too much for you, we can lower this to 25%, right? And you still have these scratches, right? But they're hardly noticeable. And this is for a lot of the detail I'm adding. You know, we're going to be adjusting the opacity. But for now, we want to, like, you know, this is just an example. This is like a real material, right? So we have the scratches added to the bump, right? And some people stop there, right? And they go, scratches are on my material, we're good, right? And for me, if I'm adding any textures to my materials, it has to propagate and affect every part of the material. And so what I mean by that is, so we affected the bump. Now we want to affect the glossiness, right? Now, which, in theory, glossiness and bump actually go hand in hand, right? In the real world, when things are rough, it's essentially just bump, right? When you have a scratch surface, you have lots and lots and lots of tiny little bumps or crevices that are appearing on the material. Glossiness, in a way, is just an easier way for the render engine to interpret that and render it. So what I mean by that is, let's so we're just gonna have the bump map have the scratches, right? And let's just render region this, right? So this is the scratch map with just bump, right? So let's actually remove that and just plug it into the glossiness, right? Now, it's not the exact same result, right? But you're getting very similar results. Now, obviously, we don't have that height data from the bump, but you're having where we're like removing parts of this material, and I hope that makes sense. That glossy and bump really go hand in hand. In theory, they're a lot of the same things for a lot of different parts of 3D. But so basically, we want to have the bump map including this, and we're going to multiply that, and then we also want to include it into the glossy, right? And we want to multiply this. Now, you might not be able to notice this at all. Like, we could render this out and compare it in Photoshop and you'd see it, but probably, or not probably, what this is really doing is you're blurring the reflection or the glossiness on like the edges of these scratches. So let's just disable this. And you can see the difference is we're getting the scratches are a lot more pronounced. And you can even notice it here, like this is still shiny where this object's being scratched, right? Which that's not correct, right? If you're scratching a very shiny surface, you know, it's most likely it's not going to be shiny in these crevices or these cracks that you're creating, right? So we want to blur the glossiness here, right? And you can see we're getting a lot, the glossy or the scratches are a lot more pronounced, right? And so some people go, all right, let's stop there, right? We've added the scratches. And no, we want to keep going, right? And so we want to affect the reflection map. Now, once again, the reflection map, well, the thing is, reflection and diffuse maps, like they don't exist. They're not real things, right? Like in the real world. These are things in 3D that we use to, you know, replicate the real world. And so by adding the scratch map to the reflection map, we're essentially simulating a separate material that's on top of this material, right? So we're going to be simulating, so these black scratches here, we're going to be multiplying this into the reflection map to essentially darken the reflection in these crevices, right? And essentially what we're simulating is like dirt and grime and dust being trapped in these scratches, which is what would happen in real life. And it's, you know, it might be hard to notice it like on the video. I mean, for me, I can see it's obviously darkening these crevices. And what we can actually do is, let's say we really wanted to exaggerate this effect, right? We copy this output map, right? And plug it into the reflection map. And we can like crunch these values. Whoops. We can crunch these values. And so now you can really see where we're not getting like almost any reflection here. Now, if that's a desired effect that you're looking for, or you're going for, then, you know, that can be fine, right? That can work for you. For me, like I said, I usually lower a lot of these opacities because there's still going to be some reflection, because even the dirt and grime that's in there is going to have reflection, right? And like I said, no value in 3D is going to be 100% white or 100% black for 99% of things. In which most texture maps that you find or you buy these days are pretty well calibrated, and the background is never going to be completely white, and the scratches or like the imperfections are never going to be 100% black either. They've like adjusted those values for you ahead of time. And so one last step is we want to apply this to the diffuse map now. And obviously we want to multiply this over the top. And this is, once again, we're simulating that dirt that's being caught in these crevices. Right? And obviously this effect is, well, if this is what you're going for, like, maybe someone took this sphere or this ball, whatever this thing is in real life, and they took a pencil and they were just, jamming this lead into this plastic ball, right? And like you have like lead that's been stuck into this now, right? I don't know. And that's where a lot of the artistic touch comes from, is like writing stories like that, of like, why does this material look like that? But yeah, pretty much, I mean, we can lower this effect. And this is the basic material structure that I use on all my shader setups. I'll probably open up some of my shaders from other scenes to show you like how complicated it can get. And this is like a very basic version of what I do. But it's essentially, if you're adding a texture into your material, propagate it throughout the whole thing. And now, once again, saying that, you should do that. Like, I added these scratches and I've affected every part of the map, but sometimes I do add textures where I don't affect the entire map. Like, let's say I do just want to add, like, a different bump to the surface, right? I'm probably not going to add that same texture to every other part of the map, right? Or like, let's say I want to simulate like some like sticky like syrup, or like some, I don't know, like some sticky like residue on top of the material, right? I'm probably only going to affect like the glossiness and the reflection, right? Like, I'm probably not going to add anything to the bump. And so it's kind of just one of those things where it's like, you're an artist, like, feel it out, do what you like, follow your intuition, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, now I'm going to show how I layer another piece of detail, right? And I'm just going to do this like very quick without explaining it, right? Just show you how fast the process is, right? So we take our texture setup here, right? And just copy it, right? And now all I do is I go and load a different map. Let's load like some like grunge texture, right? And remember that we have this output here. I'm probably gonna soften this up a bit. Actually, just like reset this. And the thing is like, I know what a lot of these textures look like, and I'm looking at the preview here. Sorry, the preview here. And like, the more we crunch this, the more black values you're gonna get, and like vice versa. But yeah, let's start adding this detail into the material. So let's load it into the diffuse. Oops. And then we're just going to quickly add this to every other part of the material. And I'm just doing this quickly just to show you the detail you can add. Yeah, so I've loaded in all the maps, right? And so what we need to do is we need to go to the reflection slot, right? And multiply this. And probably, like, this material is looking very rough and beat up now, which, if that's the effect you're going for, then sweet. We want to lighten it up a bit, so we'll set this to 25%, right? Then now we have the glossiest map. And we want to multiply this, because we want our previous glossiness to come through. And we want to really lower this now, like 5%, because we still want this to be pretty shiny, right? Even though this is looking like a pretty damaged material, we want it to look like it's a fairly new object that's been like recently damaged, maybe. And then we go to the bump, and then we want to multiply this, and then set this at like 25%. Let's even go back to the diffuse, and oh yeah, we didn't even lower this, 15%. And now normally when I'm working, I would go layer by layer, right? I'd do the diffuse first, get it looking good, then I do the reflection map, get it looking good, glossiness map looking good, and then bump looking good, right? But you can see is, let's raise some of this detail just so we can really see it. we can see now that this material is looking pretty damaged now. And the way V-Ray renders, which maybe I'll render into this, V-Ray, the bump is really hard to see when you're doing like preview renders like this. When you do like a full render, like a bucket render, I mean, you can start seeing like the bump kind of clears up last, is what I'm trying to say. So like it might not look like this is a very bumpy or rough surface, but like the more this render clears up, you can really start to see the detail or the roughness to this material, right? And the thing is, what I've showed so far is like I'm just adding detail to add detail, right? Like none of this detail has meaning. This is not a real material. I'm not recreating anything. I'm not even creating anything with purpose. I was just purely showing how to plug in maps and how to take your clean base material. Because like, look, we can go back to and disable all these layers, right? And this is where my workflow really excels. Is it's not fast to render, but it is very what's the word I'm looking for? Not procedural, but it's very adjustable, right? So we can go back through and like, let's say we don't like the scratches, right? Or let's say our boss came to us and go like, I don't like the scratches, right? We can disable the scratches, or we've already disabled them, and just re-enable the other map that we put in. Yeah, and now we have that detail, right? And now, let's say we want to add the scratches, but let's say we just want like very light scratches that it's only visible in the bump, right? Even though I said like you should never do this, right? At the end of the day, you're an artist, right? Do whatever you think looks good, right? And that like in theory, like if you have really, really light scratches, maybe dirt isn't being trapped in there, right? And like we can even lower these scratches again. And like a thing that clicked for me in 3D, that like really changed the way I look at things is, in my mind when I started as an artist, I looked at 3D as like a formula, right? There's a correct way to do something, and there's a right answer to something, right? Which isn't true. It's very much an art form. You're very much an artist, and there is no right answers, right? It's when you're working on something, it's whatever feels right, whatever looks right in the end. And so even though like I was talking about at the beginning how like, I add a texture to my material and I always propagate it throughout the entire material. Usually that is how I do it, but sometimes if the scratches look good, the scratches look good. And like right here, I kind of like this material. It's not anything special, it's not anything crazy, but you have like these scratches that are just kind of breaking up the surface, right? And the thing is like, we know they're scratches, right? But like someone might look at this and not even realize that these are actual scratches on the material, that it's just some type of like surface deformity, right? Or it's some type of like just the way the surface looks. And like for example, if we were creating a metal, right? This is like for a plastic, right? But we can easily turn this into a metal. We'll like set this up like an IRR of like 3, and then change this to a reddish tint, right? And now you have like a more metallic material. Now for metals, it's usually it's a little bit more of a complicated setup than just like changing the reflection color to red. A lot of times I'd add like a fall off map, but yeah, that might be a topic for like a different day. But like for right now, let's just keep this a plastic. Like 1.6 1.52 is like usually like the sweet spot for most plastics, but once again, it's not a formula. Do whatever looks good. If an IRR of like, if like 1.3 is your desired look, right? Go with 1.3. I used to get really caught up in like, it has to be physical. It has to be, I have to make everything physically correct. And it's like, what does physically correct even mean these days? Like I don't know. And I used to like follow like a chart that had like the IOR of like every metal like ever created, or like every metal that's like in existence. And like I used to follow it like to a T. And like now I really treat 3D very artistically, and I think it's really improved a lot of my work. Instead of being so like held down by this idea that like there's one way to do it, I have to do it the correct way. And so like that's the basis of how a lot of my materials are set up. Now I'm gonna open up an older material to kind of show you like a really, really complicated setup. Yeah, actually, before we hop into that, I'm gonna go over one more thing. So, a few more, like, I guess, key functions of my shading process. I don't know if that even makes sense. But like for example, let's edit this material a bit. I'm basically going to disable the grime layer and just enable the scratches, just so I can like really show this. Okay, and like let's make this like super visible. These scratches, right? So basically, with this diffuse layer, with these scratches, right, I'm trying to simulate the grime and like dirt being trapped into them, right? Now, this is for me. This is where it really clicks for me on wow. There is so much detail to add to shaders. So right now we are just taking a where is it at? Right here. This is the scratch map. We are just taking the scratches that have a pretty much pure black, or it's not purely black, but a dark texture, and multiplying it over the top, right? Now, in reality, that grime has different colors to it, right? So what we can do is, and this is where I was talking about Burcon maps, or not, sorry, not Burcon maps, Burcon noise. And once again, like, there's not one way to do this. You know, you can use like your own texture map or whatever. I'm just doing it with noise because that's just how I always do it, right? And so we're actually going to replace the scratch map, right? And what I always do is, so you can either do one of two things, right? In V-Ray, at least, I can click on a map and then click this button, in which it actually opens up the map inside of, or it's rendering only this single map, right? Which is, when I'm like working and I'm, you know, working as fast as possible, this is how I normally do it. I'll just show it just because like I don't, maybe every render engine has this now. I have no idea. But I'll just show it like in just a normal render, right? So we have this noise map. Sorry, I'm just thinking about something else. We have this noise map, right? And so we can just quickly add a little bit of detail to this. We'll do something like this, and we can actually make this kind of big, right? And what we can do is actually add color to this noise, right? So let's add like a dark, like brown, and like maybe a really dark green. Let's make this really dark, right? And so now this is now our like our grime layer for these scratches, right? And what we can do is use this scratch map that we have that's propagated throughout the rest of the material, use this as a mask, right? So we put this into layer 2 mask. And sorry, what we actually need to do is we can use another output, right? Because I have this output plugged into this map. We can use another output, and we need to flip this mask, right? And so I talked about this earlier in the introduction, or I think I did, is like, I don't really have a script. I'm not like, I'm kind of just working in real time. So like that's a mistake I would make in real time, which like obviously like I'm taking a very long time to explain it. But like what I would do instantly, I was like, oh, this needs to be inverted, another output map, and just go to invert, right? And so the way this mask works is the same way it works in Photoshop, right? It's only showing the white parts of this map, right? So we have this scratch map that's inverted, so only the white parts are coming through. And the white parts that are coming through is actually this texture that we created here. Now, it's actually kind of hard to see that we have variation here, but like, let's just let's make it very noticeable, right? Like for some reason, let's say we wanted a blue and yellow texture coming through for whatever reason, right? And we can actually crunch this just to make it super noticeable, right? So now we have this blue and yellow, like let's say this has been scratched by some type of paint or something, right? Or I don't know. For whatever reason, we have this orange and bluish greenish scratch marks now, right? Now this is just another layer of detail that you're adding in, right? Because before we just had a basic black scratch map multiplied over the top, and now we have this multicolored look over the top. And what we can do, of course, is we can multiply this entire layer over the top. And let's go ahead and actually multiplying it, we'll do a linear dodge. And so what we can do is actually lower this, right? And so we barely have these scratches coming through now, but we still have that, that light blue and like that orange coming through as well. And like it makes a lot more sense to have this as like actual real like grime looking colors. But I hope that really, like for me, when I first figured this out, or I first was adding this level of detail to my shaders, it really clicked for me. Where it was like, oh, like I need to be adding way more detail than I have been adding. And once again, you probably won't even be able to notice this detail, like just like looking at it, like unless you literally render out two different versions and like you're comparing it. It's very slight variations, but that's what makes a shader look really good. It's hundreds of different little variations. And so we can go back to having this on multiply, and like if we were rendering out like a what's it called, like a diffuse or like an albedo map or like a diffuse filter like AOV, it'd be a lot easier to see. Let me see if I can actually just render out this composite map. Actually, yeah, you can kind of see this. So you can see what we're doing with the effect that we've added, right? Some of these scratches have lots of dirt collected, and then some of them have not, a lot of dirt collected, right? And once again, this is just another layer of detail to add on top. And this same idea of like, we're not only have we varied the surface up with scratches, right? We're varying up the intensity of like the grime that's being trapped in these scratches. We can also vary up the like the reflection map or like the glossiness map, right? Because right now, all the scratches that are being applied are pretty similar intensities, right? You can layer over another layer of noise over the top to vary up different areas of the scratches, right? And you can use large scale noise or very small noise to vary up the results. And these are like the basic concepts that I'm applying to every part of the material when I'm adding detail. And yeah, like I hope a lot of that makes sense. Like a lot of this isn't like I've already mentioned this 100 times. It's not a technical tutorial. This isn't a step-by-step guide. I really want to talk about the theory and thought process behind my materials, because if I have any information that's of value to offer to people, it's this stuff here. And this is stuff that's just, one, I was taught like this, right? If any of this workflow is familiar to you, Grant Warwick, I don't even know how many years it's been. I mean, he's not even in 3D anymore. He's working on NFT games or something now. But yeah, like he was my teacher back in the day, and he's where I learned 3D, and all this stuff is stuff that he was teaching like 10 years ago, maybe. Maybe not that long, like 5, 6, 7 years ago. But yeah. And so thinking about varying up every detail you're adding and just adding more variation on top of more variation on top of more variation, that's where you get that really convincing look. So yeah, I hope this helps. Okay, so I've opened up an older scene of mine. This is from the Gameboy project earlier this year that I showed at the start of this video. And I just want to show you how complex the shader graph can really get. And so let me just select this material for the base of the Gameboy. And yeah. Yeah, it can get pretty complicated. But this actually isn't that complicated. This is exactly what I showed in the previous part of this video. So this is the blend material, right? And so I have like the base plastic up here. It's really hard to like show this on like a very small portion of my screen. But you have like grime, dust, and then these are actually mixing the maps. And another mix map. And so yeah, like doing breakdowns for like materials like this, and so I'll pull up this material or this render in Photoshop just for reference. Like doing breakdowns for stuff like this, like it's kind of pointless. Like maybe it's cool to see the behind the scenes or like see how complicated it is, but like you can't really learn anything from like me showing you the shader graph other than like it's just a spaghetti mess. Yeah, that's why like showing the breakdown for the plastic material, which I will do later. It's just kind of pointless. Like I could go through and like render this object with each layer and like turn on each layer to show you what it does, but it's I mean there's just really no point to it. But yeah, like as you can see, so I have the UV randomizer, the triplanar, and then the texture, and then an output, right? And then this is connected to other outputs that are then connected to composite maps, right? And then I have the composite map for the diffuse, or this is for the reflection. This is for the bump. Where's the diffuse at? This is for the diffuse. This is for probably the reflection. Oh no, the glossiness. And see, like I said, this might look super confusing, and it is. And like to go back, like if I was going to go back and work on the shader, I would like reorganize this. Like it's kind of like neatly tucked away right now, or like there's like a I don't even know what this is called. Like it kind of like organizes all the maps, but it's like horrible to go back because it's like they're all spread out, or they're not spread out. Sorry, they're all like in line. But I also like go back and work on this material. I would probably disconnect every single map and then manually re-input every single map just to see what it's doing and then changes. I mean, obviously this is where like layering these different materials, or not layering, naming these different materials or these different maps um, would be smart. But yeah, like this was a personal project, right? And like this is like going to the extreme, right? Like, does this single material need this many different textures? Of course not. But like that's the whole point of doing personal projects like this Gameboy project, was to really see how far I could push it, you know. And I remember working on this project. This project I was using like Max 2022, I think, or 2021. I don't remember what version it was. And like every time I reopened the slate material, it would crash instantly because it was loading all these 8K maps, which is like super overkill, right? But I mean, like, I won't lie, like this result is, I'm really happy with it. I'm really proud of it, and like you can see all the different detail that's included into this texture. I mean, there's just so much different aspects, and it's making it look very not necessarily even real, just like unique. You know, there's just tons of detail. Yeah. I don't know. I never know how to talk about my own work. Like, I'm obviously proud, but it's like, you know, yeah, I don't know. And yeah, like that's kind of what I wanted to show here. Like I said, there's not much point to like render this stuff out. I mean, it takes a while to render, and like this has like grime and like dust blended into like crevices and stuff. That's something you can add in a single material. I prefer to render it over the top just to separate stuff. Once again, it's just how I was taught. But yeah, next we're gonna move into probably less 3ds Max related stuff and more breaking down reference or talking about. Actually, I think what I'm gonna talk about is the Keys project and kind of go into the theory and all the ideas that I had that I incorporated into the shader. So yeah. Yeah, and so one more thing that I wanted to talk about, or just popped into my mind, is the idea of geometry imperfections. And I know this is mostly a video about shading, but it's geometry imperfections is something that I fall into the category of shading, because if I'm working with a modeler on a project, I wouldn't expect them to add these types of details. And now this is stuff that's like, obviously, it's extremely dependent on the type of project you're doing. You know, for me, in my mind, there's projects are on a spectrum for me, right? And on one end of the spectrum, you have perfect, clean renders that are meant to just show off a product. And then on the other side, you have like dirty, like very candid, you know, this is a photo taken with your iPhone of like a dirty, broken object, right? Stuff like that. And so what I mean by geometry imperfections, and shout out to my good buddy Vijeko Renderam on YouTube. Really great friend of mine. He's a really great guy in general. Not even, I mean, he's a crazy 3D artist. He has, I can't name too many people above him in terms of skill. that is putting out content on 3D. Yeah, he is excellent. I'll definitely link his channel in the description. Or maybe I'll throw it on screen right here. But yeah, RenderRim, Vijeko, he's amazing. He talked about this in one of his videos, and I remember I reached out to him, and that's how I think we originally connected. Because it's like someone had lifted like like those blockers they put on horses so like they can't see like the rest of the world or whatever. Or I guess it's just like to have them pay attention. I don't even know what they're really used for. But it's like he had removed those from my head, and like just a different part of 3D was like unlocked in my brain. And it was the idea of geometry imperfections, right? And it's like when you're modeling something, you want to model things with uh, preciseness, right? And because you can do that in 3D, you can make everything perfect, right? But in the real world, nothing is perfect, right? Um, Sorry, that song came to my head. But yeah, nothing's perfect in the real world. And if you go and like look at like a drawer that you have, and I might put up a clip from his video, or maybe I'll just link it. But Vijeko Runderam, he talks about this and he shows examples of how like you might have like a wooden drawer in your house, and if you look at like the spacing between the drawers, there's gaps in it, and they're not perfect gaps. And what I mean by that is it's very little details, very that like you probably I doubt anyone can actually tell from this render, but I'll show you right now. And this is what I mean by geometry imperfections. Let me just grab. Yeah, here we go. So the space between here and here is very different. Like this whole keypad is shifted, right? And now I haven't held one of these Game Boys in a long time, but I believe this keypad does shift around a lot. Like it's not perfectly in place. And this was a detail that I consciously added. I'm not just really bad at modeling and I mess up the gap here, right? And so and honestly, this might even be too big of a gap, right? Like it might be too noticeable. And like for example here, right? These gaps are not the same. These gaps are not the same, right? And like this is like a really good example where like you look at the start and select button and they look pretty similar, right? They're the same buttons in the same spots, right? But the positions that they're in are not the exact same, or it's the spacing between them is not the exact same, and those are the imperfections that are in the real world. And I know this isn't really related to shading, but if you're working with a modeler or you're modeling the project yourself, a lot of times what I do is I'll model something perfectly, right? Or sorry, I don't model anything perfectly. I'll model something with very like perfect gaps and like very coordinated and very has a preciseness to it, right? And then I'll make a second version of the model that has all these errors in it, right? And so I have a clean version of the model that is like just good to have on hand, and then I have like a more realistic version of the model. And like for example, here you can see this warpness from where this glass or this plastic meets the crack here, right? Like this is not a straight line, right? Like if I draw a straight line here, you can see where this is warped in and out, and you can really see here where this is super warped, right? It's really noticeable here, and these are details that like could I just add this in post? Yeah, but this is something that I definitely included into the render. And I believe the way I did this was I just selected these polys like around this area, and then applied like a noise with like a fall off, and so like it's just like basically applying like real bump to this. And like you probably could get away with just doing this in shader. Once again, I wanted to go above and beyond for this. Right here, you can see like it's really warped. Like honestly, I'm not even the biggest fan of this spot right here. Like if I was going to go back and redo this project, I'd like probably fix that. I mean, this is like a pretty destroyed looking object. But yeah, and like those are some examples of like the geometry imperfections that are extremely important in your renders. And even like if you're working on like product renders, or like you're working on basically renders that are just meant to look like photography, right? Or like you're working on studio shots. Those imperfections are in products. Now sometimes like a retoucher might go in and fix those problems, right? Like it's funny, photographers are constantly removing imperfections, and 3D artists we're constantly adding imperfections, right, to blur that line between reality and 3D. And so yeah, that's just something I quickly wanted to talk about, and just stuff like this is really what like will set your renders apart, in my opinion. Yeah. All right, and while we're on the topic of surface or geometry imperfections, I wanted to show the geometry imperfections that I did on this most recent the keys project. And like I might open up the 3D file and show it, but I mean I feel like I can just show this in Photoshop. So this whole line that is like pretty much the I mean whenever this was manufactured, the way it's not welded, but it's I guess put together, the way it's made. This entire line around this entire object is not straight. Like I mentioned before, is I had a very clean basic model of this, and then I essentially took the geometry that's making up this bevel or this like inset or not inset, but this detail, and it is kind of randomized. It's some parts it's like it's going into the object right here. This part it's coming out. It's going back in here, going out. Like it's kind of there's basically a noise applied to it, and it goes like and from zoomed all the way out, it's kind of hard to notice it. I'm gonna go to like a different lighting, like this. I mean this, and honestly, like this render is honestly pretty shit. I mean like the only thing I cared about is like pretty much this showing off the material. But like, yeah, this whole thing, you can't even tell that it's probably not straight, but that detail is there because it's when you have too many things in 3D that are just too perfect, your mind starts to subconsciously pick up on them, and they're like, this doesn't look good or it looks off, and you might not know why, or you might look at a render and be like, whoa, like this looks amazing, this looks crazy, but you don't know why. It's details like that, and then also in the category of geometry imperfections. You can kind of see them here. I have like these, they're basically little plastic bits that I noticed my reference for this was, I have this actual key on my desk that I just decided to tackle to, model it, texture it, render it. And there's these little bits of plastic. I hope you can see that in the video. Let me like make this brush thinner. Yeah, these little bits of plastic that are like hanging off. And like this is actual geometry. I would never do this in shader. I don't even know how you would do this in shader with like a displacement. I don't know. And these little bits of like, I mean, they're almost like hairs. I mean, basically what I scattered was little splines, I believe. And it's just meant to look like bits of plastic, right? And you can't really see it. Yeah, you can't really, because all these parts are blurred out, so too much depth of field. But yeah, you can definitely, I mean, these parts are pretty fucking sweet. And you can also see like this, stuff like this is actual geometry, which you can easily do this in shader, right? But like, if I was gonna do like a turntable for this detail right here, I actually don't even know what it was on the actual objects. It looked like bits of like plastic that had like eroded from here, or like I don't know, like bits of plastic that had just been like almost like smushed into this key. I really didn't know what it was. Maybe it's grime. I have no idea what it was. But yeah, like, and because this key that I was rebuilt or that I modeled and textured, it's pretty small, so I couldn't even really tell what it was. But I did add this detail, and like, and once you get really close, like this detail honestly looks pretty flat and boring. But like, I mean, zoomed all the way out, like it, once again, it's just another layer that looks pretty solid. And like this is something that I'm doing. Once again, depends the project and depends like the setting for your project, right? Like, mostly for like personal projects where you don't need, or sorry, client projects or like really like production projects where you don't need these types of detail. Obviously, you wouldn't be adding this, but like for personal projects or for projects where I'm just trying to go all out, I'm always adding on to my model. And like pretty much I can show this. I mean, I might show it later. I don't want this video to be too long. I mean, it's already long enough, but um, pretty much all I did was I scattered splines based off this line geometry that's in my model, and just kind of faded it off. So like it's pretty much only being scattered here. And yeah, and like this surface, like this whole model has noise applied to it. It's very slight. I could turn it off and not even notice it. It is very, very slight. But this entire model has noise applied to it. So like if you were looking at this surface like eye level, like let's say like you're, standing right here and you're like eye level with this, it's not straight. Like there is a slight warp in this, and you can't tell, but yeah, and it's like consciously adding details like this, like you know, adding noise to this took less than 5 seconds, and it's a little bit of detail that changes the image just a tiny bit. Like we're talking literal pixels, but it's doing stuff like that. 100 times, you're gonna get drastically different results, right? And it's going to make the difference, and it's those details that it's actually, this is a perfect example of details like that. Don't change your render, but not having them can change the render, if that makes sense. So like not having like details like this, right? Like these hairs really don't add too much to the render. I think they're cool, right? Or they're not hairs, so sorry, they're bits of plastic. It doesn't add a whole lot to the render. Like they're only really seen in this area, right? And I guess over here. But not having them, something would feel off, right? Or like it would feel a lot less detailed, right? And adding stuff like that to your work is, for me, is what sets me apart from other people, I feel like. So yeah, I hope that helps. Okay, while we're in Photoshop right now and like talking about this project, which I apologize if like this isn't the video that people were expecting to get, which like it's dumb. I shouldn't apologize for like a video I'm taking my own time to record on. But like I think a lot of people just really cared about this shader, but like I said, it's kind of boring. And I have a lot more to offer, I feel like. But I am going to talk about this because there's a lot of good information to talk about here. And yeah, let's just hop right into it. So with this project in particular, and like a lot of the ideas that I'm talking about in this video, I still don't do. Like I'm still constantly making mistakes every project I'm on. Like I'll be in autopilot mode, or like I'll talk about like, hey, don't make your certain colors in your project too saturated. I make those mistakes. Everyone makes those mistakes, right? I try to not make those mistakes. And even today, I'm going to be critiquing my own work and showing where massive errors or like things that like look bad or things that look good. And really for this project, I'm really trying to, because for me, there's like 3 different like modes that I go into, right? I have, client work mode, right? And that's like get the job done and get paid. That's pretty much the objective, right? And then there's like learning mode, right? And learning mode is like, man, at least once a week I go down a massive rabbit hole where like I'm emailing 3 different people, I'm DMing 2 other people, I've like have like 6 different instances of Max open. I'm testing like the way that the glossiness is reflecting depending on the angle. I'm adding in like extra fall off maps, and like I'm like talking to V-Ray devs, and like I just go in these deep rabbit holes, and like it's cool to research that stuff, but then it's like actually applying it to my work, sometimes I forget about it, or like my ADHD, I can't even speak. My brain just goes into other places and I forget about it. And something that's cool about recording a video like this is, I feel like if I'm telling other people to, hey, include these details into your renders, or hey, don't make these mistakes, I'm hoping that I consciously, trick myself into not making these mistakes, or teaching myself to not make these mistakes as well. And so this project in particular, I really tried to shade this project with purpose. And what I mean by that is, at the beginning of this video, when I showed my original workflow in V-Ray and 3ds Max, and I talked about how there's no purpose in the detail matting. I added scratches map because I wanted to add a scratch map. I added grind map because we wanted to add a grind map, right? There was no purpose, right? And so for this project, I hope, and there's purpose for everything I added. I mean, and even so, there's definitely some errors, right? And kind of, and this is also something that I wanted to do with this video, is I'm really trying to cover topics that like I don't hear anyone talk about, and they're probably boring to talk about. For me, they're super interesting, and I think for a lot of the hardcore guys that they'll find this stuff interesting. And it's for me, it's this idea of logical shading. Um, and what I mean by that is, so I have scratches on this object, right? Um, and you can see here, I have a scratch here, there's a scratch there, there's a scratch there. Now, this scratch right here, ooh, this does not look good, okay? And this doesn't look good for a lot of different reasons. One, this is a pretty big scratch for the surface of this object, right? Like, think about from a logical perspective on, okay, what is making this type of mark, right? Something with a lot of force had to literally take a chunk out of this. And, this key, actually, I don't even have the key on my desk right now. I should be while I'm recording this. But this key is, like, it's very small, one. And two, like, I'm pretty sure, this is, like, hollow, I'm pretty sure. Or there's, like, maybe, like, structures holding up. I have no idea how this is constructed. But, like, in my head, I'm looking at this. I'm like, man, if an object is hitting it this hard to leave this big of a gash, I'm surprised this whole key didn't get destroyed. Or not destroyed, but maybe even like breaking, bigger pieces of this. And it's stuff like that. Like that's a very objective thought, right? Like there is no like, oh yes, that is correct, or no, that's wrong. It's just something that I'm thinking about, right? And also, you see how this scratch or this mark is like bending down, like it's going down. Now think about in reality if this object is being scratched, right? Can technically an object like land here and scratch it, and then this object, this object is moving forward, and then it scratches down here? Maybe, but it's pretty unlikely, right? And actually, what I tried to do is, so this scratch map that I have applied went all over the object, right? And what I did was I hand painted the scratches to stop here, right? Because in my mind, this object's being scratched by something, like maybe this key is, it's in your pocket with like a quarter, or it's in your pocket with other keys, right? I just have a hard time imagining that like it's gonna scratch here and then continue down here, right? Like in my mind, it just scratches here and like the object, continues moving forward. And I hope that makes sense. Yeah, and like these scratches, for example, they continue down here. This scratch, I know for 100% fact that it went all the way down like this, and I ended up cutting it, or I painted the scratch. And it's stuff like that where, like, yeah, let's say you want to have an object that is scratched, but make it make sense, right? And so another thing is, like, I tried to not have any scratch marks or very little scratch marks noticeable in this area, right? Because it's a concave area. I believe that's the right word. Yeah. Concave, because convex is outwards, right? I don't know. It's a kind of an area that is for something to scratch here. Like, it is possible, right? But one, it's a small surface, and two, something has to like perfectly like fit into this crack, right? And like once again, it's one of those things where it's like this top surface is more likely to be scratched than this surface, right? That's just kind of my thinking on when I was shading this, right? And then for example, dust, right? There isn't really any dust on the flat surface of this, right? And the only dust that's really included into this project is one, this is not even seen in the render because there's a key here. But like in these crevices, right? Where you're gonna have, this is where dust is gonna build up. Dust isn't really gonna build up on these flat surfaces because this is where you're pitting your hand a lot. You're pitting, it's rubbing up against your shorts, or on your keychain, or it's yeah. This area though, like, think about it, this object is very small. I can't even fit like a finger on this really. Like, I maybe could put like my pinky here and like rub it across here to clear this dust. But like, dust is gonna build up logically a lot in these areas, right? And so, for example, this part, right? This was another intentional detail. This whole undercarriage, or this whole loop, once again, it's very small. Not even my pinky finger could fit in here. This is where the keychain goes. I believe I have. Oh yeah, I did render a keychain, or I forgot. Yeah. So that detail there, or the key ring. Sorry, not keychain. The key ring is constantly being rubbed up against this area, right? Damaging it a lot. And like, I had some pictures of the reference that I took with my phone that like they honestly just looked really bad. Like I need to get a new phone, I think, or I should have taken some nice pictures with my camera. But like I said, this was just a little like project I did on the weekend. Like it wasn't anything serious, but this undercarriage, right, was super damaged, right? It was super worn away. Like it was a completely different material at that point. Like and there was even like bits of like plastic hanging off because where the keychain one, like imagine someone that has a key, right? I don't know about anyone else. I'm constantly fidgeting with things in my hand. If it's my phone, I'm spinning around. If I have a key in my hand, I'm probably messing with the key ring and the other key, right? And just like I'm just pulling that key ring back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, right? Just like I don't know, I have ADHD. I'm weird. Who knows? But like you get that damage, and that's damage that's going to be happening on keys like that, right? And like the thing is, like I'm building a story with this render, right? Like there's purpose to this damage, and even like this damage is like not perfect, right? Like this doesn't make sense. Like technically, could the keyring make a gash like that? Yeah. Like this keyring, see, like it has you know, these the end parts of it. Technically, like that could like rub up against here and cause that gash. But like the thing is, like this plastic, this like causing a gash this big in this plastic, it would be pretty hard. Like it's yeah. So like it honestly, it doesn't look good. Like that's something like you know if I was to go back and you know continue working on this project or like this project, I pretty much made the shader and clicked render and I posted it. Like there wasn't a whole lot of thought that went into this render besides the actual like working process. Like I didn't do too many revisions, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Yeah, so like this gash looks a little weird. Some of these lines look kind of weird, but it's fine. I mean I really like parts like this where it's like, you know, you can still see like the old material that's like it's kind of the same as this over here. Like you see underneath. And then you're starting to see where it's like this stuff right here where it's really just been worn away. Like some of this looks kind of bad or like this transition of like actually well yeah it doesn't look that bad but yeah it doesn't look the best. But yeah, and like I said, like I was gonna like critique my own work and just kind of go through my thought process of like all this detail that I added, right? You know, these scratches, I really like these scratches. Another part of this material, this key plastic part, I don't even know what this part of the key is called, the key holder, I don't know. This flat part was essentially a different material compared to the edges. And if you actually look at these edges, they're pretty reflective, and they're not as damaged. And that was just me going off my reference. And these front parts were, it was almost like a car, not a car paint shader. It was very like flaky light. The way the highlights rolled off the surface, it was very like a super bumpy surface. And yeah, that's something that I included in the shader. I mean, you can see how reflected this is, right? But then you can look at how matte this is. You know, this is, it's still reflective. Like, let's look at like a different lighting. Like, this still is super reflective, obviously, right? And like this under part, this is another detail. This whole under part, let's go to the forward. This whole under part is more reflective, or is more like glossier, I guess the right word, than this. And because like I said, it's this whole rubbing of this keyring has like completely altered this material. And like stuff like this, like, whoops, I changed the color of this. Like stuff like this, I mean, this just looks super solid to me. I like the look of this. But yeah, and like, also, what was I gonna say next? I just lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, so for this render, right? So like honestly, this stuff right here looks pretty bad. Like I added like a last minute. Or it doesn't look bad, but it like I said, if I went back and made revisions, I would change this. Actually, I think this might be like an older version. I think I actually. Oh yeah, I did. Yeah, I did adjust those actually before I posted it. They're still noticeable, but essentially, I don't know how well this is going to show up on the video or in the recording. But this is just another detail that I added. If you zoom all the way in, right? So there's noise here. There's like colored noise. It's really tough to see. But like if you zoom in like a pixel level, I have added colored noise over the top of my entire render. And that's just something that I do in post. If you've ever zoomed in on a photo, there's that colored noise that you get once you go super, super, super zoomed in. That's just like it's like a photographic imperfection that I add to my renders just to when you're just trying to break up the the uniformity look. But then also I've added more or stronger RGB noise where I'm like trying to simulate like almost like oil or like residue that's like wiped over the top of this plastic, right? And like zoomed all the way out, right? You can see these parts with like their different colors, right? And which honestly, like the renders with no post production looked a lot better, or like for this stuff at least. Like the CC or the color correction I applied to this is a bit strong. But like from like here, like you can tell that there's like something on the surface, right? And then like, you zoom in and then you see like this like this noise looks so good to me. And like you can tell like there's something on this surface, right? And once again with my reference, that was I noticed that like you rubbed your hand over this key a lot and like you were getting like this RGB like reflection almost in the key. And like once again, like are these details realistic? I honestly don't know. I have to get a microscope or like look up, really close up plastic reference to really tell. And like this is where I think, man, I don't know who said this. I write a lot of stuff down that either one I think of it or two I read it from somewhere. But like I think someone once told me this, that like having a reference is great to get to like 80-90% of the way there, right? Like you want to get like 90% of the like I would say this key matches probably like 90% close to like my actual object, but that last 10% is where you can put your artistic spin on it, right? So like stuff like this, like there's like dried up like bits of like water or like bits of maybe this key was in the kitchen while someone was cooking and oil has splattered here, right? Or like who knows what kind of nasty grime is being built up in this area, but that's details that I'm adding, right? Or like these fingerprints, right? Stuff like this is just so cool for me that I can't, like, this is 3D, I can add it, it's part of my artistic touch that I like to put on this stuff. And yeah, and like zooming in, like this stuff like isn't perfect. Actually, do I have a closer crop? Or I guess this is a closer crop here. Yeah, and so like you can see, like zooming in, like this right here looks super good to me. You're getting this really detailed bump surface. You have this scratch, and then you have like this oil residue that looks really nice. Yeah, let me go back to this original image. And yeah, and like once again, I'll go over the breakdown for this for this material and substance later, which I keep saying I'll do it later. It's just because like it's kind of like the Gameboy that I showed earlier. I'm just gonna unhide all the layers and kind of show it. What I might do actually is just rebuild this material from scratch. But the thing is if I rebuild this material, it's never gonna look the same, right? Because it's, once again, 3D for me is not a formula anymore, and it never really was a formula. I approached it like it was a formula, and that was holding me back so much. But like the reason a lot of this detail is here, I explained it. I explained why I added this. I explained why I added that. I explained why I added this. And it all has a purpose. And if I was to remake this, I might approach this completely differently. It might have a completely different look if I was to remake this. But yeah, I think that's pretty much all for this image. I hope this stuff is helpful. Like for me, if someone came to me and was like, teach me 3D, well, okay, if they asked me to teach them 3D, I'd probably send them to YouTube. But like if they were like, I want to get better at 3D, this is the stuff that I would tell them. This is my most valuable information that I have. I want to share this information. I want to show it to other people, and I hope this inspires other people to teach me, or to release their own videos like this. But yeah, this is the stuff that like really excites me in 3D, is really building a story around your shader, and like And yeah, that's probably all for this section of the video. And yeah. Alright, so we're going to hop into substance and finally go over what kind of inspired this whole video to be made was this original key, the plastic top to this key. And so we're just going to hop right into it, and this is a disclaimer. And this is not me being humble. I genuinely don't know how to use Substance Painter. You might look at my setup here and be like, oh my god, this guy is so clueless. I promise you I am. I have less than like 24 hours in Substance. So yeah. And once again, like, I'm just showing you how I got my results, right? Substance seems relatively like easy to grasp. I mean, considering like even if this entire way I did it is completely wrong, I mean everything like not the UI, the responsiveness of the program was like really great. Like I was able to output all the maps and load them in the V-Ray with like very little adjustments and like get I mean you already saw the final renders and get pretty solid results. So yeah, so I mean I don't think I made too many mistakes in this, but yeah, I'm still like learning Substance. Yeah, so let's just hop right into it. So once again, like I talked about earlier in this video, I have my very base super clean plastic, right? And this base layer right here, there's like 4 fills here with just different grunge textures. You probably can't even see this in the video. You kind of can, I think. But yeah, I'm literally just breaking up the base color, and that's all I wanted to do with this layer, right? And so then, and I talked about this earlier, how I only name layers if I'm trying to look professional. I actually did name these layers when I was working, just because it was like really easy and it took no effort, and like I actually wanted to like be able to go back and adjust this material as I was like making it and like checking it in 3ds Max and V-Ray. So yeah, I didn't just do this for the recording. But yeah, so then we have this flakes layer, right? It's just a normal flakes map from Substance, and it's just, once again, this is just affecting the normal essentially, and we're just getting a little bit, we're just breaking up that surface, and I'm kind of you'll see throughout this process, and it's just like how I talked about in my workflow from 3ds Max V-Ray. It's the exact same, pretty much. It's the exact same approach, the exact same. The thing is, what I pride myself the most in 3D is my fundamentals, and it's the theory that I've been taught and that I've learned. That like I can take, if tomorrow 3ds Max and V-Ray get deleted off the planet, I can go pick up another piece of software and be absolutely fine. If Substance Painter got deleted tomorrow, I'd be absolutely fine. And it's these fundamentals that I carry to whatever I'm working in. I carry these fundamentals over. And so this is just varying up the roughness. This is where we start with the large scale details that I was talking about. So we have some large scale bump going on here. And then I'll separate these layers one by one and then show them all together. So then the super fine bump, right? And this is where we're starting to get some really nice detail. We're just trying to build the base key texture as if it just came out of the warehouse, or the base key material as if like it just came out of the warehouse, right? Even though I am trying to make it look super clean, it's not super clean, because like we've talked about, in reality, it's everything is going to have some type of dirtiness, some smudge, and this project in general was like, the approach was already that it's going to be like a dirty, messed up key, just because dirt and imperfections are just fun in 3D. Who likes just making clean, boring models, like, or clean, boring textures, right? Like, you want to add the detail. For me is like is where all the fun comes from. So we have this big bump, right? And then the super fine bump, and you can see like just the super fine bump looks very flat and boring. Looks a little bit better with this big bump, and then vice versa, right? This big bump, I mean, well, it honestly looks like shit, but that's fine. Combined with the other layers, it looks good, right? So we have the big bump, super fine, then we have this variation, right? And then I'll just isolate this. This is just little bits of pieces to break up this fine bump, right? And so if we compare these two, right? Pretty boring, pretty uniform, and just this little bits of like pieces sticking up just adds that bit of variation, right? And then this last layer, which I didn't name, is just more surface variation, right? And like this texture in general on this object might not even make the most sense, but once again, this is just my base layer that I'm trying to vary up the surface, right? And so combining all these layers, right, we have a pretty good starting base, right? And like this material here, I mean, like depending on your scene or like how far away this key is in the scene, I might even just stop here. You know, it's depending on what this is actually being used for. Now, obviously, my render, I wanted to get like a high, you know, a high resolution close up like a shot of this. So you know, of course, I'm gonna keep adding detail, but like this is honestly not a bad start. And this is this is something that like I've been trying to figure out in Substance. And if I didn't already mention this in the video, because like what I've done with this video is I've kind of like just sat down, record for 30 minutes, go back, listen to it, and then go back and record for another 30 minutes. And like sometimes I don't remember if I like repeated the same thing that I said before, or like if I explain something in a weird way, I'll go back and re-explain it a different way. But if I didn't already say this, if you see me do anything in this video that like you think is wrong, or like you think, or not even if you think it's wrong, if you think there's a faster way to do it or a better way to do it, please reach out to me, DM me, email me, spam me on Twitter, wherever you can find me, you know. And I'm always, I promise you when I say I have absolutely little to no ego in 3D, I'm always willing to be humbled. And you know, and also, and this goes for anyone that uses Substance, right? I'm sure everyone on the planet right now has more experience in Substance than me right now, or anyone in 3D. I'm pretty late to the Substance train, but yeah, if you see like anything that I'm doing in Substance where it's like, oh, like, you know, you can do this with like one less layer, or like this is an easier way to do it, or like this is a cool shortcut, you know, always, you know, feel free to reach out to me. And so, oh yeah, sorry, the whole point of that little rant is organizing your like layer stacks in Substance. I'm not sure how to actually do it. Like I know there's like folders and like you can like color them and stuff, but like I just, you know, I watched a few videos just to get like some of the basics down, and I see a lot of people like they'll set up like the base material and then they just have all their layers added on top, and I guess like they're grouping all these layers. But yeah, if like anyone has advice for that, you know, feel free to reach out and tell me. So yeah, this next layer, this is more flakes, and once again, this is actually a flake map that I have just in my texture folder, and this is just changing up those the normal map essentially. And it's just, I really at this point I didn't know what exactly I was trying to do with this layer. I had talked about this before, how this object had a very rough flat surface, like on this flat area, where I said like it reminded me of like car paint, like it is like a car paint and a plastic mixed together. So yeah, that's the kind of the effect that I was going for. This is just, I'm actually making this object a bit shinier because I didn't like the roughness before. Here we're starting to add like some large scale roughness to this, you know, and this is honestly like, it looks like a lot right here, but I think I end up like adjusting this later, or like I lighten this spot up a bit. But yeah, then these outlines, once again, this is a piece of detail that's very faint, you can barely even tell. And I'm just adding to the diffuse. I'm adding, we can actually look at this. I'm just adding just very faint detail to the edges of this object, right? And this to simulate like maybe like wear and tear of like being bumped in the objects. But yeah, so here we're just adding more to the roughness. Some fingerprints. This is actually a hand painted like little smudge or little like dirt effect. We can actually click on this, and yeah, this was just hand painted on. And like essentially, I mean, I think this is the way that like everyone approaches it in Substance, but I don't really know. And this is the same way I approach it in like 3ds Max. Is so I have my base material here, right? And then I just have a black mask and I'm painting with a white brush, right? And this would be like the same as like adding those texture maps and multiplying them over the top, or adding them over the top. So yeah, let's just go layer by layer. Oh yeah, so I did end up lightening this up. I added like a fingerprint over the top. Oh yeah, and this was honestly me just playing around. Like I didn't like how this fingerprint really looked, like this like high resolution, and like you can even see here, like it's, you know, this is not correctly added, or I need to paint this away, or I don't know, that's, you know, an error obviously, right? And so I ended up just blurring it, and it's you do get that like effect that like something is over the top, like it's, you know, you have like these different glossiness values or roughness values that you can see they're being layered. And this is where I started to tackle this under the arch detail. And once again, this is just painted on, hand painted underneath. This dirt layer. And like, this is honestly what I love about Substance, is like how quickly I can just, you know, turn this mask on, see exactly what it's doing, enable it, disable it. And like this real-time rendering, or I'm really bad with like terminology for things. I forget the names of everything, but like whatever this like, you know, rendering that's in real time that Substance does, like it doesn't look bad. Like obviously like the V-Ray render looks, you know, a million times better, but like it's almost like back in the day. I don't, you know, when I first started 3D, like not real-time rendering, but like progressive rendering, or like the frame buffers were just kind of coming out, but like my PC at the time could definitely not even like run that, and like I still was working like in like the shader ball like preview of like you're building a material out and then rendering it, waiting for the buckets, and then okay, I need to adjust this and that. And that kind of actually reminds me of Substance when you're building these materials out. Like you're not getting the final preview or like the final image or what it's going to look like, but you have a really good solid idea of like what it's going to look like in engine at least. Yeah, and hope that makes sense. I've been saying like I hope that makes sense a lot, just because like I don't know, I'm just sitting here talking to myself, I guess. Which like I actually have enjoyed recording this video. If I do something like this in the future, I might actually live stream it. I think that'd be a lot better. Like if just one or two guys watched me and like were asking questions and stuff, or like someone would like hop on call with me and like ask questions, you know, it'd be a lot. Or I think it'd be really cool, and then just upload that live stream as a video. Yeah, like maybe I do one of these once a month or something. I don't know, maybe, who knows. But yeah, so this was just, I added, I mean, this is really faint marks, right? Well, actually, this mask is pretty dominant, but it's the opacity is lowered a lot. But these are just little like sticky marks that I've added to the top. And once again, like I'm just adding little bit by little bit by little bit details. Like I'm not trying to get all the detail of this object in like one layer, right? There's no point. And so let's go to the next layer. Just some like ambient occlusion dust, or it's using the curvature map. I mean, oh yeah, actually no, this dust is like, I was wanting to get it like on the edges, and like, I mean, this mask, it looks pretty bad, but when you have it on like low opacity, you know, you're just adding that subtle effect, you know, just slight dust being built up along these areas. Circle. Oh, actually, okay, I know what this is. So this was a tiny detail that was on top of this object. That it was funny because these keys come in two, like sets of two, and there was this weird like circle that was on top that I'm assuming is just like a manufacturing, not error, but like, you know, result of like when they're being made or whatever. I'm sure there's like an easy explanation for it. And it was just this little circle on top. And originally, like when I was making this, I was gonna do like a turntable with this. I just kind of got lazy and just did a single render. But yeah, that's why I added that detail. Yeah, and so then this, I did not name this layer. So, oh, this is just, I think this is just adding to the diffuse. Oh no, it's adding to the roughness. Sorry, I forgot I can check down here. Yeah, just adding more little dots and specks to the roughness. This back texture. Oh, this is where I was just hand painting stuff on the back. This was like, at this point I was still debating whether like I need to texture this entire thing and like do a turntable, or if I was just gonna mess around with this top part. I think this back, yeah, I started to paint on the sides. I actually don't even know if I kept this layer enabled when I output the maps. I actually can't remember. But yeah, and like, as you can see, like this is a pretty simple process. You know, I'm really, what I'm doing is I'm isolating a part of the key that like, okay, I want to nail the bump. All right, now I want to nail the roughness. Now I want to nail the like specific details, like this arch, like the roughness of this arch, right? Or I want to nail the dust in the crevices, or I want to nail the, you know, specific like little smudges, or you know, where this has been like rubbed away or something, you know, or this, you know, something hit this object, or, you know, whatever, right? This large wobbly bump that I have named, it's super hard to see Now I'm disabling it. I think I actually didn't enable this layer, and then I ended up doing this like with the actual geometry in 3ds Max. That I mean, I think I talked about that. Just so like, you know, because like in reality, this is not going to be perfectly straight, right? And so I added like a bit of like wobbleness to this, and I mentioned earlier, like it's so hard to see, but you know, it's that lots of details like that are hard to see, or you don't notice them, right? Scratches. All right, this is where I think if I have like anything of like substance to offer out of substance, no pun intended, this is where I added the scratch map, right? And so what I've actually done is I'll show this setup. So I have the scratch map that like you can see where I was talking about earlier, where these scratches are continuing over the edge, right? And there's scratches here, this mark here, and then I've adjusted the levels a bit just to get how I want the texture to look like. And then I've painted away, which I guess I actually did end up painting this away, or maybe it bothered me enough and I, you know, did it in my sleep or something. I don't even remember painting that away. But as you can see, I painted away some of the scratches down here, and I still have a scratch here, but like when I was talking about earlier, like the reason I painted away in this little crevice is it just, in my mind, it's really hard for like an object small enough to land here and leave a scratch that moves all the way up like that. You know, it's just, we talked about it earlier when I was talking about the theory of it, but like, and like even here, like there's still, you know, there's still a scratch where I missed, you know, where I can paint this out, and I'll actually show that. And so we just go to black brush, and I can just paint away those errors, right? And that's something that I guess I must have missed, or I don't know. But yeah, like you can see enabling, disabling this paint layer. And like what you could really do is, you know, you can add your textures or generators or whatever in Substance, and then just paint away, you know, the parts you don't like. And that's what you know, where the power of Substance really comes from for me. And then also notice that I've added these scratches at the top because I want the scratches to be pretty much the last detail on the object. You know, I want this to be on top of everything else. Edge smooth. Oh yeah, this is where I pretty much, this is just a mask I painted, where I wanted to adjust the roughness of these side areas. So if we enable and disable this, you can see that this is a lot glossier than this top part, which is just something, a part of my reference. Yeah, or a lot less blurry, I should say. Now this is like the last layer of flakes. This was another flake map that I added that's different than the generator flakes from Substance, and then from the second map as well, I believe. And this is where I really started to get that really fine detail and that flake look that I keep talking about that I kept seeing in my reference. And yeah, and it's hard. I mean, this is looking pretty solid. You know, and it's pretty much. I mean, we're at the end of this layer stack. This edge bump. This was something I was playing around with like last minute. Once again, I don't know if this is actually even rendered in the final image, or like this was like in like the final output. I was trying to simulate, you know, when this object gets really roughed up, and like messed up. Bits of like plastic are like hanging off and like coming and being rubbed off on the edges, and I kind of tried to simulate that with this bump. I don't think I actually included this in the final render because it doesn't look that good looking at it now, but maybe I did. I have no idea. And then I have this little grime layer where this is where I was just scattering that dust buildup in these crevices. Oh, sorry, in this mask. Oh, did I crash Substance? I was saving, sorry. Yeah, and this was just a generator that they have built in the Substance, which like those are awesome. I mean, it almost feels like cheating using some of these generators, and then I just overlaid a texture over the top to kind of break that up, and I'll show that. You know, you see this was super like nasty and gooey, and I just kind of like lighten that up with this, multiplying this texture over. And then I think this is a trick that a lot of people use in Substance, if this isn't something that someone's seen, then it's new to you. It's just sharpening all the layers. So you pretty much you have this fill layer with none of this selected, and then you add a filter with sharpen, and then you have all these layers selected. And you can see if we go up close, you're just sharpening all these layers. And you got to be careful with this effect. If you go too much, it starts to like distort it, or like you get like artifacts and stuff. But yeah, and like I said, sorry, like this breakdown for this is like not that exciting. Or maybe it was exciting for you. I don't know. For me, it didn't feel that like exciting. Because like really breaking down something like this, like to like give you like a true breakdown, I'd have to just remake this from scratch and just record my entire process and like all the like adjusting, opacities and multiplying it and like showing you all my errors of like, spending 10 minutes trying to add an effect that like doesn't look good, and I end up just scrapping it, right? And so I guess maybe in the future I'll just start, recording anytime I work on something that's, cool that I'm going to post to social media, just in case someone wants to see a breakdown of it, or maybe I should just record in general. I don't know. But yeah, that's this material and substance. Hopefully this was helpful, or, gave you some cool insight. And yeah. Yeah, so I'm actually in the process of editing this, which there's not really much editing to do. I'm just cutting out parts that like I messed up, or like I explained something the way I didn't want to explain it, or cutting out like people yelling in the background and stuff. Yeah, I just want to say thanks to anyone that watched the entire thing. If you did, you're an absolute trooper. Listening to me stutter, fall over my words, misspeak, whatever. I really do appreciate it, and I really do hope that this helped somebody. I really think there's some really good information in here, or the best information I have to offer. And so yeah, I just want to say thanks to anyone that encouraged me to make this video. Of course, all my friends and other 3D people that have been encouraging me to record something like this for like years now. So yeah, and thanks. Peace.